Welcome to Empathy Stories, where real-life transformations and heartwarming journeys come to life. Today, we share a story of redemption, love, and second chances about a billionaire whose life is changed forever when two young boys knock on his door. Unraveling a story of lost love, mistakes, and the power of family. Join us as we dive into Ethan's emotional journey and witness how love can heal even the deepest wounds. The storm outside raged with a force that seemed to echo the emptiness within Ethan Collins. At 47 years old, Ethan was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He had built his empire from the ground up. His name whispered with admiration and envy throughout New York's financial elite. His home, a sprawling mansion on the Upper East Side, was a testament to his success's marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers, and meticulously manicured gardens. Yet, inside, the silence was deafening. Ethan's life, filled with achievements and accolades, felt hollow. His days were consumed by meetings, negotiations, and the constant pursuit of success. But none of it filled the void left in his heart. In the quiet moments, when the world was still, he often thought of Grace Bennett, his family's former maid, the one woman who had touched his soul deeply. But their love had never had a chance to blossom. His mother, ever the authority figure, had forbidden their relationship, citing their differing social statuses as the reason they could never be together. Grace had been forced to leave. And with her, Ethan's chance at happiness vanished. That was more than a decade ago. Since then, Ethan's life had been a series of distractions, wealth, power, and endless events to attend. But tonight, the storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil brewing within him. He sat in his study, his mind wandering, until a flicker on the security monitor pulled him back to reality. Two small figures stood at his front door, huddled together under the shallow overhang, drenched by the relentless rain. His first reaction was irritation. It was late, far too late for visitors. He got up from his chair and walked through the dark halls of his mansion. When he opened the front door, the cold air hit him like a wall. There, on his doorstep, stood two boys, no older than 5 or 6. They were soaked to the bone, their clothes barely holding together, and their eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "What are you doing here?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp but restrained. The taller boy looked up at him, his wide brown eyes filled with both determination and fear. He clutched a crumpled photograph in his tiny hands. "Are you Ethan Collins?" the older boy asked, his voice shaky. Ethan stiffened. "Yes." "Who are you?" The boy unfolded the photograph and held it out to Ethan. As his eyes focused on the image, his heart seemed to stop. It was a picture of a much younger version of himself, smiling beside a woman he hadn't seen in years, Grace. The boy's words shattered the calm. "Our mom said you would help us," the boy said softly. "We're Caleb and Connor." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, and the photo swam before his eyes. Caleb and Connor, Grace's sons. The children he never knew existed. Grace, the woman he had once loved, had left him without a word. She had disappeared from his life. And now, her children were standing on his doorstep, asking for help. A wave of grief and regret washed over him. The last time he had seen Grace, she had been determined to leave, her eyes filled with pain and pride. He had never forgiven himself for letting her go. But he never knew what happened to her. And now, these two boys, standing before him in the storm, were the product of that lost love. "Where is your mother?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She's in heaven," Connor replied softly, his voice trembling. "She worked too hard." Ethan felt as if the ground had been ripped from beneath him. His mind was clouded with questions. But before he could speak again, Caleb, the older boy, stepped forward and handed Ethan a letter. It was from Grace. The words were a final testament of her love for him, and a painful reminder of the past. Without another word, Ethan stepped aside, his body heavy with the weight of the moment. "Come in before you catch your death," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. The boys shuffled into the grand foyer, their small frames taking in the opulence of the mansion. Ethan led them to the sitting room, where the warmth of the fireplace softened the chill in their bones. He fetched thick towels and awkwardly handed them over. They sat on the plush leather sofa, still clutching the photograph as if it were their lifeline. As he sat across from them, staring into the fire, Ethan's thoughts swirled. Grace's face haunted him, her laughter, her kindness, the woman he had pushed away. And now, here were her sons, with nowhere else to go. "Start explaining," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm, as he settled into his armchair. He had no idea where this moment would lead. But one thing was certain: his life, and the lives of Caleb and Connor, had just changed forever. The days that followed were a blur of strange, unexpected moments for Ethan. Caleb and Connor settled into the mansion, their presence filling the previously empty halls with laughter, questions, and an energy he hadn't realized he missed. Ethan found himself doing things he never thought possible: preparing breakfast, taking the boys on walks through the sprawling gardens, listening to their stories, and slowly, without even realizing it, opening himself up to a world he had long shut out. But while the boys found comfort in their new surroundings, Ethan couldn't escape the ghosts of his past. Every moment with Caleb and Connor brought memories of Grace rushing back, memories of a love that was never fully realized, of a woman he had once trusted and cherished, and of a decision he regretted every day since. Their arrival on his doorstep was a reminder of everything he had lost. The photograph Caleb had handed him that first night never left his side. He would stare at it for hours, his fingers tracing the edges of the worn paper. It was the only piece of Grace he had left, the only tangible connection to a woman whose absence had left a permanent mark on his heart. But with the boys now living under his roof, that connection felt more like a burden than a blessing. Each time Caleb looked at him with those wide, innocent eyes, asking questions about his past, or each time Connor shyly brushed against his arm, Ethan felt the weight of the years he had wasted. He couldn't escape the feeling that he had failed them long before they were born. He had abandoned Grace, choosing his ambitions and his mother's disapproval over love. He had spent his life building an empire, but in the process, he had torn apart the very foundation of what truly mattered: family. One evening, as Ethan sat at his desk, the storm of his thoughts too loud to ignore, he felt a small hand tug at his sleeve. Caleb stood beside him, the photograph still clutched tightly in his tiny fingers. "Mr. Collins," Caleb said softly, his voice filled with a quiet seriousness. "Did you love our mom?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His gaze faltered, and he found himself unable to answer immediately. How could he explain to this child the deep, unresolved feelings that still swirled in his heart? How could he explain that the love he had for their mother had never gone away, even after all these years? Ethan began, but his voice faltered. The words stuck in his throat, tangled with guilt and regret. He looked down at Caleb's innocent face and saw in his eyes not just the hope of a child, but the weight of Grace's memory pressing upon him. "I did," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I loved your mother very much. I wasn't strong enough to fight for her when I should have." Caleb nodded, as if understanding something far beyond his years. There was a quiet wisdom in his young eyes, a knowing that made Ethan's heart ache. It was clear to Ethan that Grace had never stopped believing in him, that she had always hoped he would find his way back to her. But now, she was gone, and all that remained were the two boys, who were still grieving the loss of their mother. Later that evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Ethan found himself standing in front of the fireplace, the flames flickering against the darkened room. He held Grace's last letter in his hands, reading the words she had written to him in a moment of clarity. She had never sent it, but somehow, it had found its way back to him, carried on the shoulders of time and regret. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone," the letter began. "I don't want anything from you, Ethan. But I hope you remember who you were before you got lost. I hope you find it again." The weight of her words crushed him. And for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to feel the full force of his mistakes. He had pushed her away, believing the lie that their lives could never be the same because of their different social standing. But now, here were the consequences: 2 children standing in his home, asking for the love and care that he had failed to give their mother. Ethan dropped into the armchair, the letter falling from his hands. His tears were silent, but the ache in his chest was loud, deafening. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the choices he made. But the past had a way of catching up with you, especially when it carried with it the faces of those you had hurt the most. The next morning, as Ethan sat in the kitchen, trying to make breakfast for Caleb and Connor, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace amidst the turmoil. They were here now. Grace was gone, but her spirit lived on in her children. And somehow, despite all the years of regret, Ethan knew he had a chance, a second chance to make things right. To be the man Grace had always hoped he would be. But would it be enough? Would the love he now felt for these boys be enough to heal the wounds of the past? Ethan didn't know. But one thing was certain: for the first time in years, he was willing to try. As the weeks went by, Ethan found himself falling into a rhythm he never thought possible. The mansion, once an empty symbol of his success, had transformed into a home filled with noise, laughter, and love. Caleb and Connor, though still mourning the loss of their mother, slowly began to embrace their new life. And Ethan, despite the storm of emotions that still churned inside him, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could redeem himself. Ethan's role in their lives had shifted in subtle yet profound ways. No longer was he the distant, lonely billionaire with a cold and hollow mansion. He was their father now, someone who had to guide them, nurture them, and most importantly, make amends for the years he had abandoned them and their mother. It was a heavy responsibility, but it also brought a strange sense of purpose to his life. The laughter of the boys became the soundtrack of his days, and their questions and curiosity challenged him to open up in ways he hadn't in years. The days spent together were filled with small moments of joy, learning to bake pancakes with far more flour on the counter than in the pan, playing in the garden, and building sandcastles at the beach. But there was something more. Ethan began to see himself in them, in Caleb's bold, inquisitive nature and in Connor's quiet, thoughtful demeanor. He could see the best parts of Grace reflected in them. Even in their pain, they were pieces of her that still lived on. And for that, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. But redemption wasn't easy. It was a process, not a destination. And as much as Ethan tried to move forward, there were still moments when the weight of his past mistakes came crashing down on him. One evening, after a quiet dinner, he found himself sitting in the study, staring at the photograph of Grace. His thoughts turned inward, haunted by the years he had spent running from the truth. The woman he had loved was gone, and he had wasted so much time pretending that wealth and power were all that mattered. It was then that he heard a soft knock at the door. Caleb stood in the doorway, his small figure framed by the dim light from the hallway. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his voice still carrying the softness of a child's innocence. "Can we talk?" Ethan motioned for him to come in, and Caleb hesitantly stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He walked over to Ethan's desk and looked up at him with those earnest, searching eyes. I think we should be a family now," Caleb said softly, his words carrying the weight of a decision far beyond his years. "I know you're trying, but we're here. We want to be here with you." The simplicity of Caleb's words hit Ethan harder than any argument could have. He didn't need to be reminded of what he had failed to do. But in that moment, he realized the truth: he had been given a second chance. Grace, in her own way, had never given up on him. And now Caleb and Connor were showing him that love and family were more important than any mistake or regret. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "You're right," he said. "I'm trying. I want to make things right for you both. For Grace. I don't know if I'll ever be the man I should have been. But I'm here now. And I'm going to make sure you have everything you need. That's a promise." Caleb smiled. And in that simple, genuine smile, Ethan saw the trust and hope he had been looking for. It was a powerful reminder that redemption wasn't just about seeking forgiveness, it was about making real changes. About showing up every day. And about proving through actions that you were worthy of the love you had been given. The next few months were filled with transformation. Ethan became more involved in Caleb and Connor's lives. And together, they navigated the ups and downs of their new family dynamic. They spent weekends at the park, afternoons painting in the living room, and nights curled up together watching movies. Ethan's focus on his company shifted, and he worked alongside Hannah to build the Bennett Foundation, ensuring that Grace's legacy lived on through their work. But the true turning point came one sunny afternoon, when the three of them, along with Hannah, visited Harborview Beach. The boys ran ahead, their laughter carrying on the wind, as Ethan and Hannah walked slowly behind. Watching the children's joy, Ethan felt something inside him shift, a sense of peace. A feeling of belonging he hadn't known in years. The boys, free from the burden of grief and uncertainty, had found a new home. And so had Ethan. For the first time in his life, he understood that success was not measured by wealth or accomplishments, but by the love you gave and received. As they stood at the water's edge, the sun dipping below the horizon in a beautiful array of colors, Ethan looked down at the two children who had given him a second chance at life. "Look, Dad," Caleb said, grinning as he looked at the sandcastle they had built. "It's a castle for all of us." Ethan's heart swelled at the word Dad, a simple, yet profound reminder that love, in its purest form, had a way of finding you when you least expected it. Grace's love had lived on in Caleb and Connor. And through them, Ethan had found the redemption he had been searching for. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought him to a place of understanding that love, forgiveness, and second chances were the true keys to a fulfilling life. As they walked back to the car, hand in hand, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear. But with Caleb and Connor by his side, he was ready to face them. The family he had always wanted was finally his, and he would never let it slip away again. Thank you for joining us on this inspiring journey today. Ethan's story is a reminder that it's never too late to make things right, to embrace second chances, and to love deeply. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more heartfelt tales. Together, let's continue to spread love and understanding.